Well, welcome, everyone. My name is Jon Uhler, and it is my distinct privilege, probably long overdue, to introduce my son, Reed. Reed, thank you for joining me. Thank you for joining us on the program.
Of course, I'm very happy to be here and be doing this with you.
It's a fun experience. I have thought about doing this, but why we haven't done this before, who knows? We're both busy, and that's possibly what we're going to touch on that. Because we're recording this on Father's Day, 2025, from even different countries. You're up in Canada,
Yeah,
and down here in the States, you have dual citizenship, and it's fun to be able to get a chance to do this. So, well, let me brag on you just for a moment. You shared prior to us starting to record that you are, first of all, you're a new dad, so I want to say Happy Father's Day.
thank you.
And not so much new. We're coming up on 2 years. And so that's why I thought this would be very applicable. Two dads that happen to be related, so father and adult son. But you're in the trenches, you're in the thick of things. And so I thought, you know what? This could be a neat experience for us to try to encourage young dads, new dads, as they're making their way through the challenges of not just life, but also trying to be a good dad.
Yeah, I hope we're able to share some insights, and I can. I'm sure we can both share from personal experience now. You have a bit more than I do, but I'm sure we'll both have something.
Well, and times change, so each generation has its own challenges. What I wanted to brag about is not only are you a very devoted dad, and you are devoted to um, my granddaughter's mother. So I have to admit, I probably have one of the cutest granddaughters around. But you just took your test to move from apprentice to what'll be journeyman in the scaffolding field. So you're doing something that I would, and I've told you before, I've seen videos, you've sent photos and videos of sometimes some of the things that you're doing. And I have to admit, although you used to climb trees and scare the daylights out of your mom. Me too, quite frankly. But so there you are in the field of scaffolding. And sometimes you guys are way up there. And in Vancouver, British Columbia, where at times it's very wet and you're defying the odds, you're up there like a crazy guy up there. So, you're doing something that I probably am not built to do.
Oh well, it's yeah, definitely. It's hard to do scaffolding if you're afraid of heights. That's that's for sure. And I do
Or hanging
say,
on the side of a building with very little
yeah,
between you and the natural consequences.
that's true. And I even joke with my coworkers. I say that's how I started as a kid from climbing trees. Yeah.
As a matter of fact, you were good enough to put a video together last year, just kind of chronicling what things were like in our home and what your memories were like, and you referenced that. And so then post production, I added some of um, pictures of our yard, and so people can get a sense of how high you used to climb. Oh, brother, it was pretty funny. But this is a neat opportunity, Reed. So thank you for joining me. Uh, I figured what we'll do is on this Father's Day, we're going to kind of review or look at the characteristics of a good dad, because there's a lot of different ideas out there of what it takes to be a good dad. And sometimes guys, sometimes men who are dads can get discouraged, thinking they're not doing a good enough job, while others maybe need to re-examine what they're doing to kind of up their game a little bit. So what I thought we would do is we're going to review the characteristics of a good dad by using the idea of an Eagle Scout, or really a Boy Scout. Now, in some countries, they don't have Boy Scouts, but at least in the States. And when a young man, I don't think we got you guys involved in Boy Scouts. There was an equivalent to that. Royal Rangers, I think, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah.
But the scouts need to memorize various things, and one is the scout law, scout oath, and when it has to do with the traits of a scout. A lot of people know that, or guys that have gone through that. So I thought, you know what better thing to springboard off of than to use that idea, and then we'll just insert the word dad instead of a scout is. So I've got a little PowerPoint presentation. We'll go through that. And then I thought we would do some practical things from our own experience, just off the top of our head, as far as what did we take away from our own homes. Now, it'll be interesting, me as your dad. I don't know what you're going to add, what you're going to say, but I don't think you've seen the list that I've compiled about my own dad. And it's interesting how we can almost assimilate or absorb certain things, for better or for worse, from our homes. But there are some strengths that we all can take away without being really aware of how we might benefit or how we have benefited. So I figured that might be an interesting thing for us to talk about. What did we gain from our dads? And then we'll look at, and people can join then a little bit. You and I being able to talk practical suggestions or give practical suggestions, not just by us going through a list, which we'll probably do that, but then we're going to look at a little bit of our own experience and your experience as a kid. So we have some family movies that we'll look through. You don't know what I have prepped. And so we'll just very impromptu, we'll go through some of these. Some people may be very interested, some may not, and that's okay. It'll be kind of fun just for us to chronicle those experiences. Because we used to live on a very frugal, we were very financially frugal. We lived on one income. You are doing that as a dad. And that's a good place to start. You know, your commitment right now to letting my granddaughter's mother stay home is very commendable. You're in Vancouver, British Columbia, so the cost of living is exorbitant. So you're to be commended.
Thank you. And you could almost say in Vancouver, sometimes you don't have a choice with the daycare situation because from what I've heard from friends and coworkers, it can be very expensive if you don't get in one of the government funded facilities, the daycare facilities. So even if you did want to have two incomes, I think it might be quite a challenge to even get daycare here.
Well, so the extra income then virtually goes to pay for daycare.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a huge consideration, obviously, in the family budget and decision making. So it's hard to make it these days, especially depending upon what's going on financially in each country. So, well, without any further ado, how about we get into we'll start to make our way. There we go. Okay. So we're entitling this Words of Encouragement for Fathers on Father's Day, and I chose three pictures to kind of show the how quickly time passes. I had heard that as a young dad, and now here I sit with my grandson, who is number three. So we can see that once upon a time he wasn't a part of the family. I should have just started with Nicole and then progressed. And um, I don't know, it kind of captures the passage of time and then also things that we enjoyed. But even from any of those pictures, Reed, anything come to mind?
Yeah, well, I remember the fire pit there. I could see the us sitting outside by the fire pit, and I remember when you were putting that together on the back patio, and it brings to mind on that same little area in the back, we'd have the you set up that projector with the
Oh,
we could watch
yeah, yeah.
movies in the back at the barbecues. Yeah, that was definitely a great experience, and I think it was a really good addition to the backyard that um, gave us a spot to sit as a family, and yeah.
Yeah, and that's one thing we can encourage dads to do. We got those from Home Depot or Lowe's or one of the, and those are really gardening bricks. And I think we had three stacked up, or I had three stacked up on one another and made a fire pit. So that was something that we used a lot, especially, well, in the wintertime. No, also in the summertime, huh? And
Yeah.
so that was a lot of fun.
And
Okay. Yeah.
something else I remembered actually is because that brought to mind we mainly you um, and my brother and I we would go and chop wood. So we had the whole pile of wood in the back. Um, I feel like that was a good bonding experience as well because I think most, especially most boys, it feels kind of fun and manly, using the axe and chopping wood. Um, so that was a lot of fun as well.
And great, it's great for physical exercise and dexterity. It was, that was a neat experience. It also came to mind in looking at the top left and then the middle one. I tried to make bedtimes, um, not just a nice routine, but I tried to uh, make it so that there would be memories. And I remember reading. And probably one of the most enjoyable things for me is I would ad lib or add little extra lines into the story. And the thing about kids is they know how the story goes. So I would insert little phrases, and it was both fun to see if you guys would notice, but you always noticed. And then, of course, I'd see how far I could get into there before you guys say, Daddy, wait, it's not in there. So I think that's what's going on in the middle one right there, the middle picture.
That's great. Yeah, it's so that one's so long ago. I barely remember that, but I do. Uh, that does sort of ring a bell when you were saying about the ad libbing because I remember we had that one book, The Wind in the Willows, and you do the voices for Froggy,
Yeah,
and
Froggy.
I
So
don't remember the exact voice for each one, but I remember that was a lot of fun when you read them out loud.
okay, well, there's a good tip for dads that that's a fun thing to do. I really think your kids want to know that you're enjoying spending time with them. And so it doesn't cost very much to get a book and sit down and read with them. So, okay, let's see if we do the PowerPoint properly. Okay, so what I did is I just kind of Googled or I put in, characteristics of a good dad, and boy, oh boy, AI really it's quite something these days. It'll write things for you. So it says a good Boy Scout embodies. So what we're going to do is again use the idea of the Scout law, but we're going to insert the idea of a good dad. So a good dad embodies the principles of Scout law, striving to be trustworthy. So here are the characteristics, and every Scout needs to memorize this: trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. These qualities are not just words on a page, but are actively lived and practiced in all aspects of a scout's life. And so now we're going to insert, let me see if I can do this. I may not have done this properly, so I may have to do it manually. Let me see if I can do this. Um, okay, maybe I just have to manually do it like that. So you notice I've substituted out scout and then inserted the word dad, a good dad. Okay. So, trustworthy. A good dad is honest and keeps his promises, demonstrating integrity in their words and actions. Read any thought about that, and whether you're thinking about me or you or dads in general, as we go through some of this list, and then I'll add my 2 cents.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind um, would be thinking. about my own experience with my daughter, for example. Of course, she's still not just barely a toddler now, but um, I think thinking about the future with her, I want to exemplify that in keeping promises and showing her the importance of that. And because being trustworthy with, especially in those close relationships, family, that's very important because, yeah, trust is, of course, the basis of a lot of relationships, including marital relationships and in your relationship with your spouse and your wife. So I think, yeah, and then I'd have to think maybe once we talk about more about childhood, I'm sure I'll think of something in my own experience.
Okay, there we go. I was just thinking as you guys were growing up, your mother would, and I had to learn, it's true, because I can um, sometimes overpromise. I get all excited. So I think there were times that um, I hadn't taken into account budgeting. I'm thinking, for instance, here's one thing in our yard, I would have loved to put in a zip line. And so I think I had mentioned that multiple times. And then also, I think it freaked your mom out a little bit because part of the zip line was going to go over some trees or I don't know, it was going to get some elevation. We were going to go from the fort to one of the back trees and kind of do a triangle to where the little platform was where you guys used to swing. So that would have been a lot of fun. Um, and that never came to pass. So part of the challenge for dad is if you want to be in there, sometimes we might have a tendency to say, hey, we're going to be able to do this. Then you look at the budget or you look at time constraints and it doesn't come to pass. So I think over the years, I had to learn that, okay, wait a second, I need to think before I just start espousing certain things or talking about it. So something as simple as that. Can your kids take what you said at the bank? But also in terms of promise keeping. So hopefully that was always important to me to make sure. And how did I do with that? I guess here I'm soliciting, and you don't have to give me the answer I'm looking for, but uh, do you feel that, like in our case, that you guys could you trust me?
Yes. Yeah, the simple answer, I'd say yes. Um, yeah, because I certainly I don't think of any situations. It'd probably come to mind right away if I didn't see you as a trustworthy dad. So I'll just go with that.
Okay, I won't put you on the spot for all the rest, but so that's good. That's kind of hopefully what all of us dads want to be able to ask our kids someday. And none of us are perfect, but trajectory wise, we need to be able to shoot for um, having a good track record. So, okay, I'm going to go back to, sorry, working with the PowerPoint. Okay, loyal. So we've got trustworthy, loyal. A good dad is dedicated to his family, friends, school, and country, showing support and commitment. Read any thought about that for young dads?
Ah, well, I can speak to my experience with you as my dad, as loyalty to family. I definitely noticed that growing up because you were very committed. It says commitment there at the end, and you're committed to family first. Um, because I remember you would always work hard when you had at least two jobs. You might have had more, but that's what comes to mind. So I know you'd work hard, and then whenever you came home, you'd be focused on the family and see how we were doing as kids. And I don't remember you're putting a whole lot of time in for yourself after your family. So that's yeah, that comes to mind right away. That's that commitment.
Huh. Well, I didn't even solicit that one. Well, that's nice to know. I think that's such a challenge for each of us as dads. right? To keep in mind that probably the most important time of the day is when we step through the door at the end of the day. The question is, do our families breathe a sigh of, do they breathe a sigh either because they miss us as we pull out of the driveway or because they are glad that we're gone? So that can be a test of how well we're doing. So, okay,
Mhm.
helpful. A good dad willingly assists others without expecting anything in return, demonstrating a selfless and supportive nature. Any thoughts about that for young dads?
I do actually. Well, I think I've almost had to learn the opposite, where sometimes sometimes I'm too helpful, which I'm don't know if I got that from the way I was taught, or but I think there's the balance where you want to be helpful, but then um, you have to know that you're the one, for example, supporting your family financially, of course. So it's um, like if someone comes to you asking for financial help, you have to have that balance, knowing if you are able to help that person financially, or there's some other way that you can help them. Because, of course, you have lots of scams out there, just being realistic. So I think it's being helpful to the extent that is reasonable, I think is the key word.
That's a good word. What that tells me probably is in our home, you saw us being helpful, but maybe at times you saw us being a little too helpful, a little too involved in people's lives, or that there is a balance, right? You have on the one extreme of men that are not going to get into the lives of anybody but themselves. The opposite is trying to make sure that we're not enabling or rescuing. So, good point. Good point,
Mm.
Reed.
And I think from what, just before we move on there, just from what I've heard about as your kids get older, of course, I'm sure I'll experience this myself, but um, of course, most of us have heard the term helicopter parent. Now that, of course, that's the extreme of trying to control your kids' lives, or being too helpful. But again, I think there's that balance there as well. Just for example, even little things right now with my daughter, I try to like if she's trying to boost herself up onto a seat, I'll be there to help her from falling, of course, safety aspect. But I don't always, boost her up, or I don't always, if she brings something to me to open it, and I've seen before that she can open it, I'll say, "No, I know you can do this yourself," which might even be more helpful than my actually doing it for her.
So, being okay to watch them struggle a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't know how well I did that. I think I know that we can kill them with kindness, and I remember I killed one of your butterflies. I have a photo of you with the monarch butterflies. Remember that? There were three little butterflies, the caterpillars that we did for a science experiment. And
I'd completely forgotten about that
oh,
actually until you
good.
said it.
Okay, because I had a reputation among you guys, right? The last one was struggling. And I'd actually heard something along the lines of you're not supposed to help the little struggling butterfly out of its cocoon because it needs to struggle. But I thought this one was going to die. So I gingerly cut the chrysalis as it was struggling. And that actually did not allow the butterfly to struggle enough. And so that one, because I inhibited the normal process of struggling, we could say I loved it to death and it was bad. And I'm
Wow.
glad you forgot because boy, oh boy, I lived that reputation down very easily. Daddy, I can't believe you killed the butterfly. Okay, good.
Uh,
So I didn't traumatize you for life on that one.
no, or either you did, or I completely forgot because it
Well,
was so
see,
so traumatizing.
yeah, that's right. You suppressed the trauma on that one. Okay.
Yeah.
Friendly. A good dad is welcoming and approachable, making an effort to be inclusive and accepting of others. Any thoughts on that one, Reed?
Uh, Not that come to mind right away. What about you? Can you think of any from
Yeah.
raising us?
Um, there's a balance. We can be so welcoming that we lose sight of spending time. We're right. If your home is so friendly, then you're not spending time maybe with your kids. Um, I think that's what we're really looking for is balance. So we want to find, even with friends, we want to find the right balance. How much time do we invest ourselves in the lives of others? If anybody's a part of a church, churches, I think, sometimes are notorious for keeping people so busy that the kids can get lost in the shuffle. So I know I was always trying to strive for a balance with that. Um, but it's important, I think, for kids. Well, I know kids are watching, we're modeling for them. What is it like to uh, interact with strangers as well as people that you already know. So hopefully, well, so let me ask. I guess I'll solicit, but not so much for me, but for anybody that's listening. What did you guys remember of me when it came to my interaction with other people?
Hmm. It's a little bit tough because it has been so many years, but um,
Your memory.
yeah, I'd say overall, I I don't think I ever remember of your turning someone away or um, of just ignoring someone, and I think always, yeah, I'd say overall it was reasonable interactions, and you'd be willing to have conversations with people. Um, yeah, so even if we were busy, I don't remember don't talk to me, or I'm busy. So including for us, I think, because of course, um, when it comes when it has to do with your kids, you're still, even though you're family, of course, you're still separate people. So um, I can imagine, for example, if a dad um, has his own business, that can be especially challenging because you have to spend so many hours um, just in the business, even on your home time. But trying to still show your kids that you have time for them, and they can actually approach you with things, I think is important.
Well, that's an important thing. So, well, good word on that one. Okay, I'm a
Thank you.
courteous. A good dad is respectful and polite in their interactions with others. And just as you brought up with the description of friendly, thinking about how are we doing with one another in the home. So interactions with others, either inside or outside the home, using good manners and demonstrating consideration for one another. Anything come to mind about that?
Well, I remember, um, for example, with swearing, we there
I'm
was
laughing
never
because
any swearing in the home.
I'm laughing because I'm remembering what it was like with my dad. He he had a few choice swear words every now and then.
Okay. So you could have taken those, but you chose not to. Eh?
Okay.
Yeah, so that's one thing that comes to mind is being conscious of, and I think most parents know this. When you're around your kids, you're more aware of what you say, especially because they copy everything. And my daughter and your granddaughter, she's starting to get to that stage now, especially where she'll really, we're noticing she's really copying our words and the way we do things and that. Um, Even up to hand gestures and that. So I think that's a good um, a good thing to keep in mind is that term courteous, just being aware of um, because if I read, yeah, it says respectful and polite in their interactions. So just try not to be rude, especially when we're in front of our kids. I think is important. And yeah.
You mentioned about hand gestures, and I immediately thought of like driving because there's two times that
Mhm.
typically kids are going to see us really who we are when we're eating. The three times when it comes to entertainment, food, entertainment, and driving. And so uh, we'll go with the driving for a moment. I don't think my dad did road rage, but I it was not uncommon for my dad to have a running commentary on how how many idiots are on the road, and he would just go on. Um, how did I do? Let's say with driving. Did I fit this, or did I need some help, or could I have used some help?
Well, I don't remember any road rage incidents. That's
No,
something.
no hand
Um,
signals.
no, because I think I would remember that, and I'd say, um, like I've heard, of course, that you tend to copy your parents in a lot of ways when. So, I find for myself, almost never use my horn. Um, So I imagine, and I don't think I've ever had a road rage incident up till now, at least. So I think that's probably a good sign is that um, I don't think you had any road rage incidents at least, and yeah, nothing comes to mind really, which I think is a good thing. You know, because driving is just a day-to-day thing, so I think you'd more remember the negative incidents. Um, but I actually remember just the other day when I was driving, a man. This is just out of the blue on my way home from work. Um, there was a gentleman who fell into the road. I'm pretty sure he was drunk, or I'm not exactly sure. But so I stopped the car and just put the hazards on, and so I left my cars technically in the driving lane or one of the two driving lanes, so cars could still go past. But fortunately, there was another person who stopped their car as well, so they went over there first because I was trying to debate whether it was safe to go over and that. But we helped him, literally put him on like his arms on our shoulders and just took him to the side of the road. So there's just some random things like that. I think is, um, you know, trying to be a little bit considerate for others. Um, yeah, that just came to my mind as we were talking about driving.
Hmm. And in this day and age, how many people would have just driven by the guy? So good for you,
Yeah.
Rick. Good for you. Well, and there's kind. Actually, by the way, the word for kind is actually useful. So, a little trivia there. So,
Mm.
good dads treat others with compassion and understanding. That you just illustrated that, demonstrating empathy and a concern for others' well-being. You actually just did that as well. So, anything that comes to mind, you didn't know you'd be responding to that one ahead of time. So that was a very powerful example then. Not many people actually see that kind of thing, that where somebody fell in the
Mm.
road. So that's fortunately not a very common occurrence, but you did the right thing. So good for you.
Thank you.
Others just
I mean,
drive around him or something.
exactly. Well, I was going to say, you could, I suppose you could argue it's just trying to get him out of the road too, but there are kind of, I suppose, both aspects to it. Um, well, let's see. Compassion, just looking at the keywords here as well. Empathy. Yeah, I think um, that's very important, especially I'm thinking of growing up in the church. Um, I think that's an important one to take into consideration is a concern for others' well-being and demonstrating empathy because I think it's easy to um like let's say if you're in the church for example it is easy to kind of view yourself as or a lot of people I think have that kind of better than attitude like oh better than other people. So um, I think just trying to relate to other people. Um, Even I try to do that, for example, for if someone is homeless, because a lot of people they'll just say, "Oh, that's a homeless person," you know. But and I think of this as well because, of course, my daughter will grow up eventually, um, and she'll see the way that I treat homeless people, for example. So but then you have that balance where, let's say, someone's panhandling, for example, does, and I'd actually like your feedback on this while we're talking about. So if someone is panhandling, um, generally speaking, there have been times where I'll give people either gift cards, like for food, kind of fast food places, for example, um, or something like granola bar. Now, some people have told me, "Oh, don't do that because they'll actually get mad at you if you're because they'll be expecting money." But what is your thought about, for example, being kind, but also if how do you make, I guess, a judgment call in that sort of situation?
Well, good question, right? Because ultimately, then what we're talking about is discernment. So good, spot on kind of question, right? Do we just hand somebody, uh, do we just kind of have a cookie cutter approach? Well, I think if we do, then we're not using discernment because it may be that somebody is being lazy, as you're saying. And so then we're enabling them, and then we're being poor stewards of our time, effort, energy, and resources. So I love the idea, handing them a gift card or a granola bar. I remember working during grad school, so I would do delivery of publications at night. This was out in Southern California. And so I would go probably a couple hundred miles at night, just going through the rich parts of town and then Compton, South Central LA, so parts where there's not a lot of wealth. And I remember one time pulling into a shopping center because I would deliver what was called Let's Rent magazine. So right at the opening, where the doors open in a grocery store, there would be little racks of apartment guides, basically. And so as I was going in, there was a guy that was asking for money, but in that same shopping center, there was a McDonald's. And so I offered to buy him some food. We actually went in and stood in line and I let him order and I paid for it. Um, so I think it takes discernment, but our goal is to help and not be taken advantage of and to be strategically useful. And then it's always very, very difficult. I think sometimes even having a little card, like a business card, with a number where they can find a shelter or something sometimes can be helpful.
Hmm.
I like what you said, right? That just handing out money sometimes is not wise because you can have somebody that's just not interested in trying to help themselves.
Hmm. Exactly. And I think, um, especially when you're a dad versus, when you're single, of course, you tend to have a bit more money, right? Um, but when you become a dad, I've definitely noticed in myself, you become more aware about, okay, you're handling your family's finances as well, not just your own. So you have to be more, have even better judgment in that respect.
And this is where your spouse or partner can come in. Um, it's hard because usually opposites attract. So you're going to have people that tend to approach finances a little differently. And so it's important to make sure that everybody's on the same page or at least discuss that. So even talking about this issue, how do we handle that? Um, so that we can feel good about what we're doing rather than that sounds strange, but even keeping something like that, a good deed, a secret, because I I know if I bring it up to my spouse or partner, they're going to complain or they're going to say I didn't do enough, or so either way.
Mm.
That's use of finances and time. Because even speaking of churches, it's very easy to find a lot of needs, or you'll get recruited into needs. And so before you know it, you've signed up for another project. We're going to do something nice for somebody. And before you know it, you're not spending enough time at home. So we can get burned out taking care of other people. So there's kind of a different example, but it takes a lot of discernment.
And actually, that made me think of, 'cause I know you referenced some of what we would be going over before we talked, and I think I saw frugal was one of them, and that made me think of being frugal with kind of your family's resources as well, actually. And I'm certainly not saying I'm the best at this, but it's something I will be working on as a dad, of course, is just not only being frugal with money, but also, yeah, your time and where you're spending it.
There you go. Right. The four big issues for any couple to deal with is money, sex, in-laws, and kids. Those are the stress points. And probably about 80% of divorces are over money. And
Mm.
because money really just has to do with values. And if ultimately somebody doesn't want to be self-controlled, or if they're discouraged, one way or the other, they'll tend not to do a budget. And the question is, how well is a couple communicating? It always comes down to communication. But can a couple be on the same page and talk about trustworthy? Right? Can I trust that my spouse or partner is on the same page and making good on what we said? So that's why most couples avoid doing a budget because they say, well, we don't want to get in fights. So you can see that it's really drilling down to some of the very practical things, including even do we have a budget for giving gifts? And how many gifts do we give throughout the year? Strangely. And how about just pocket change or spending money for each couple? And so you really start to find out whether or not the couple is working together and whether or not they have the same values and can they trust one another.
That's a good one to bring up because that makes me think of, I think, a fairly common situation with, I would imagine, with just family in general. Because, of course, as they say, when you, um, what is it? When you marry your spouse, you're marrying their family. That phrase. Um,
That's right. It's really a experience in um, socialization and learning. Yeah, that's right. An entire cultural experience. Hmm.
yeah, and so that makes me think of, for example, um, my fiance when she will, um, like she has her family. They're not in the same. They're back in Mexico, and so, for example, she might have one of her family members if they have a medical issue, um, where, of course, I'm trying to think. I don't want to go into too much detail, but just to enough for the example. Um, so we have to decide, kind of whether we were willing to help out and how much to help out financially, because you have to. There are a lot of factors to take in mind. So I won't go into more detail in that specific example, but I think that's a good kind of something to talk about before those sorts of situations happen, just in general. Because of course there may be, who knows, a brother or a relative that asks for money, and it may or may not be a legitimate situation. So just trying to be, again, all of those descriptions we've just talked about, trying to be friendly and courteous, but also frugal at the same time, and having those money discussions.
Boy, and great point. Because so we have money, sex, in-laws, and that's not just father or mother-in-law, that right, our brother and sister-in-law. And so it always comes down to boundaries. And that has to do with values. That has to do with do I believe I have the right and the responsibility to be a good steward over my time, effort, energy, and resources and my relationships. And for us to discern, any of us to discern, are we dealing with somebody in need or like out of Matthew chapter 7, verse 6, right? Don't give what is special to dogs and don't give our pearls before swine. And really, when you look at the difference between the two, one was a domestic animal, but the Jews weren't supposed to have one. I think it was to catch people's attention when Jesus said to the group of Jews or his primary audience, right, don't cast your pearls before swine. So you really want to catch somebody's attention, go cross-grain to a very cultural thing that was directed by God for the Jews, not to have pork. So all the more, right?
Mm.
Benjamin's looking at Levi saying, "Who has a pig? Do you have a pig?" But in a third world country, right, dogs ran the streets. So I think what Jesus is talking about is whether outside the home or inside the home, we have to be able to discern um, whether or not this is a good use of our time, effort, energy, and resources, because the hardest people to put boundaries up with are in those concentric circles within the home. And so, very good point that a couple needs to work through. And that's part of the benefit, in a way, of having a budget, because then the partnership can be maintained. So I don't feel like I'm being betrayed or that I'm betraying my spouse. And then the secrets don't begin because there's nothing
Mm.
that'll damage a relationship faster than when we have secrets from our spouse. So,
And that comes straight back to that trustworthy as well, whether that's with just in life or with the finances as well, because that makes me think. I had something I wanted to add there um, to do with the finances. Oh, I think you know how, especially nowadays, everything from a financial perspective, so much is paid with credit cards and on credit, and that I think it's easier, a lot easier, especially if you don't have a budget. Because I can speak from personal experience, we've had a budget in the past. I use one. There's an app you can use. Sure, lots of different ways you could do it, but it's of course, as especially a younger family, but just as a dad in general, it's tough to find the time and actually sit down and do the budget. Um, Besides what you mentioned, Dad, about just actually getting over that willingness to actually sit down and do the budget and figure out. But coming back to that credit, um, in those situations where you have to decide, okay, how much can we put toward helping this person, for example, um, I think it can be a lot harder to decide. And and oftentimes I think it's more common as well just for friends to come to you and, hey, I'm in a tough situation. Can you loan me some money? And it can be a little bit tougher to decide, are we in a financial position to give that money you know, if you're not paying directly out of your bank account, if you're, it's like, well, it's hard to say exactly how much we have. I guess we can give, this amount. So I think it's one of those situations about what do they say? Put your oxygen mask on before you help the other person.
there you go. From
Um,
airline
yeah,
example, right? The flight attendant. Well, there, good, good. Excellent point. Excellent point, Reed. Okay, we'll continue. Obedient. Yeah, I'm glad it qualifies it, right? What does obedient mean? A good dad follows rules and regulations, demonstrating respect for authority and understanding of the importance of order. Certainly, even as we speak right now in the U.S., we've got rioting going on, um, and it's interesting the different terms. Um, of someone who has broken the law in order to enter a country? What do you want to call them? Or do you just call them a migrant? And again, even that word can be emotionally charged. But think about whatever country you live in. Um, there's usually a legal way to become authorized to be in another country. Um, the question is, how am I doing that? And in the US, right, what's happening is you've got all these riots going on, um, and people are justifying harming police officers. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. Um, and again, that's the only reason I bring that up. I see what's going on in the US, and you see people that their respect for those that are in law enforcement. Just they have no problem hopping up on cop cars and jumping up and down and breaking windows and all that, and they justify it. And it is important for us to be able to, especially when it comes to those that are in positions of respect and authority, whether teachers. So we see that going on, and that all the way that comes down to how about parental authority? You see those who work in schools or school boards. They're cutting in on parental authority. It's almost like they own our kid. Um, so it is important so that would be a different example of obedient. That can someone recognize that there is inherent authority? So, for instance, you and Laura, you guys are parents, and um, you don't want someone stepping in to tell you how to parent. You want them to value and appreciate that those boundaries. So obedient might be when you're dealing with scouts, you're wanting kids to understand initially parental authority. But I do think it's important that whether it's on the job, how about that? How many times do we work around coworkers that have no problem running their mouth at bosses? And they just have a general sense that they don't need to follow the rules. The rules don't apply to them. I threw a bunch of stuff in there, but what's very front and center in my mind right now as we're taping this is we've got rioting going on in different cities in the US where there's all this property damage, and under the justification of being angry about certain policies, they're looting phone store, different Adidas, you see these people, any excuse to vandalize and stuff. I said a lot in that, so anything come to mind about that?
Um, yeah, I think that's a good example, or those are some good examples you mentioned, because it shows just in life, not even to do with just with fatherhood or being a dad, but in general, I think there's so many aspects of authority and kind of knowing when to listen to someone or to a set of rules and to what extent. So a good example is in the military, of course. That's um, you hear a lot about um, oh, I was just following orders, right? So it's immediately I think of, okay, let's say the military in Germany, right? Let's say if you were in the military in the Second World War, right? So that's, of course, that's your country. We talk about some of the values, loyalty and patriotism, and that. So, but that begs the question: to what extent, um, you know, should we be loyal to either an authority figure or just work? Because in the military, of course, it's your job, it's your work. So I think there's no. I say myself a lot. There's no right answer a lot in a lot of situations. It's just there's not always a kind of rule book in life. It's just you have to make those critical decisions. And um,
Well,
yeah,
that's a
and
very good point, Ree, because the term obedient, right, in this day and age, the term obedient, right, can conjure a lot of different things. So I I certainly probably can speak to, especially when the Boy Scouts came about. They've been around for 150 years or something. Um, but it certainly does not mean blind obedience, right? So you bring up a very good point. But do we as dads, do we convey a sense of that we are paying respect to authority? And so if someone in authority tells us, so I'm thinking like a police officer or whatnot, tells
Mhm.
us, hey, or even a boss, right? Do I understand that there is a chain of command? Or do I undermine that kind of thing? Because you'll also see that then with within families, the splitting of parents, right? If a kid doesn't get the answer they want, they're going to go to the other parent. Before you know it, the parents are fighting. The kid sits back and watches the fireworks or waits for the outcome that he wants.
That's a great example. And I think I remember hearing before that it's a good idea for parents, just while we're on the topic of obedience and parents, it's a good idea for parents to discuss beforehand sort of how they want to handle different situations with their kids and to show their kids that they are on the same page, just as you were just talking about. That way, the kids don't feel as though oh, I can just go to mom or go to dad, whatever the that relationship is like. Um, and something else that came to mind with obedience is, as you mentioned, police officers. I can imagine that your kids, because it's likely you'll have your kids in the car, let's say if you get pulled over, right? It's very possible. And they're going to see, oh, right when you get pulled over before the police officer comes to your door, how are you, are you swearing? Um, are you showing a lack of disrespect for that kind of authority figure just because, um, even if you were in the wrong, right?
Well, excellent point, right? And that comes really highlights what we're talking about because values are oftentimes more caught than they're taught. And so that's how we end up just absorbing, for better or for worse, oftentimes the aspects of our own character because we've seen it modeled and we were on the receiving end of it. And so excellent, excellent point. Well, Reed, I figure we've got a couple more. I'm aware of the
Mhm.
time and I'm aware of you had mentioned your battery life. So maybe what we'll do, how are we doing with that?
Oh, let me take a look here. Yeah, I have about 50% left, so I'm still okay for a while.
Okay, we'll keep going. Okay, next, cheerful. A good dad maintains a positive attitude and outlook. And here's the challenge, right? Even in challenging situations, so meaning under stress. So,
Hmm.
boy, that's an important one. Any thoughts come to mind thinking of the stress for new dads, or you can even give me a grade, so to speak. That'll be interesting. Because it's only a matter of time till things happen and uh, our ship hits a rogue wave or rogue wave hits us. Life is challenging enough, and then add people to that, and then circumstances. So if just when you
Hmm.
think you've got life under control, something's going to come about. I one time heard that every family and every couple will hit something, will experience an increased or an increase in stress. There will be a stressor that will hit them about every 3 months. That's probably
Hmm.
it's not bad. So it's a good challenge as we're going through something. Can I be cheerful? It's different than happy, but can I maintain a positive outlook and attitude? So, what are your thoughts on that one?
That's a good one to add because I've definitely noticed, even at work, for example, you'll have in the construction industry, you'll have your foreman, it's basically your boss, or your direct supervisor. So if you have, let's say, a foreman who gets stressed a lot, that really impacts the crew, right? The whole work crew, because you're still trying to do your job, but you're very much aware that, okay, this person you're trying to work under is always stressed, or um, which is no. I think you can be stressed, but still try to have a good attitude. So it's not saying don't be stressed, but necessarily. But um, I think you were a great example of that. In that, and I'm sure you weren't perfect, right? It's but I don't think anybody is, of course, especially you're going through a lot as a dad. But I remember overall, you were, even though, coming home from the prison, I remember you did have a good attitude coming in the door. I think you made a point of, you know, coming home and I think taking a breath and taking, you know, trying not to carry that in the door, the stress from work, because that's like everybody knows, in a prison, of course, that's going to be a much more stressful job than a lot of people have. Um, so I think you did a great job just doing your best not to bring that through the door into the home, because of course the home is going to have its own stressors. And I've thought that myself. I've told Laura, I've told her that, and that's my fiance, but, that the home life is almost more stressful sometimes than work, because work is, quite oftentimes it's quite predictable. It's, but then you come home and that's when you have to make plans and you have all these relationships to deal with. So that's a lot. It ends up being a lot more complicated, just time wise and emotionally, and commitments and that. So I think um, that's when it really shows kind of that effort to have a good attitude.
I think you, with that statement, I think you helped a lot of guys out because unless a guy saw it modeled, it's challenging enough for us. Number one, where did it go? Wait, where did respect? There we go. Cheerful. Um, but if they didn't see it modeled, so all the more. And I think probably the majority of guys had dads that were not cheerful. So now you're taking a guy that never saw it modeled, which means they were on the receiving end of a dad that was grumpy or angry or upset, came home, wanted to be left alone, so didn't say hi to the kids. The kids were all nervous. And then he just wanted to sit down and maybe drink a beer or whatever. So if that's somebody's example, then all the more now they're going to have a double kind of a double challenge to figure out what they don't want to do. And then, okay, how do you do that? What's it like to come home? How should they step through the door? Um, so since you mentioned that, maybe I did that one well. Um, was there something about as I stepped through the door that was beneficial or helpful to guys, or was positive that maybe it could be something that a dad that didn't have a good example, um, like what does that look like? Come through the door. What did you experience from me that maybe helped give you a model or a pattern?
I think part of it has to do with what you do, and then part of it is just um, kind of the expectation, like as a kid, knowing what you can look forward to, sort of thing, and what you don't have to worry about. So I think, like in general, when I would hear you come home, I think I would, unless of course I'd done something wrong throughout the day, or of course, I think most kids have that where they know dad's coming home and if they did something wrong. But if it's a normal day, right? Um, I think I would get excited, like, oh, dad's home, So I think looking just that emotion of looking forward to dad getting home, um, and and then yeah. So I mean, that's a lot of it. Is just I think if you is you showed that, so this is just speaking from experience, you showed that you care and that you look forward to spending time with your kids. So I knew when you got home, I was excited to see you and spend time with you. So that honestly, that's a lot of it. It's not just the actions you do when you get home, but yeah. And then I think just mainly that attitude, um, just showing that you're excited to see your kids, and of course, it always helps, giving them a hug and asking them how their day was and that. But I think that's the main thing is just um, your general attitude around your kids. I think, from based on experience.
There you go. You just brought to mind, and so I would challenge dads, and it's hard. If I kind of fell into something, so if I could do it again, right, if I could do a do-over, probably one of the primary things I would change, and this is hard for every man, every dad, every spouse or partner, is we want our spouses, we want our partners to be happy. And so for us guys, since we're talking to men on Father's Day, um, I would say probably I fell into the trap of, and so I would warn against, I would suggest every guy guard against allowing the idea of the, your wife or partner, so the mother of your kids, to push you in. Well, I just used the word push, so there's that pressure. Um, because we want our wives or spouses or partners to be happy. I think most normal guys want a happy wife, and I don't ascribe to happy wife, happy life, but where did we even get that term from, right? Um, but I think it's very easy for us to want to rescue, and it's very easy for a wife partner and a mother to allow or offload the discipline of the kids onto the dad when he gets home. And so, what I would say is this to every guy, to every dad, um, be very mindful of and guard against falling into the trap of rescuing your kid's mother by taking over the discipline that should have been taken care of during the day. There's no other way to put it. So, that would be another way of saying if I could talk to the wives or the mothers, or the partners, I would say this to the women, to the mothers. Don't put your kid's father in a position of having to be the heavy or the bad guy. That so the idea of wait till your father gets home, because probably then what's going to go on is she's going to hold the man hostage. That you better put these kids in line, make my life easier, or our relationship is going to suffer. So that's a very subtle thing. It's very easy to fall into, and I would say I fell into that wanting things to be okay. And there is something to be said for you want to have a common front. So the parents want to be on the same page. But it's very easy, therefore, I think there can be the tendency for mothers to put then the discipline on the dad to back her up and then be the one to follow through on the edicts that were made. And it makes for a very challenging and difficult conversation. But I would say um, you probably are going to run the risk of being viewed in the eyes of your kids as the one that, I mean, it starts to create, it's a crazy making situation. And so it really can leave a dad in a very difficult position to have to mete out discipline that should have been done during the day, where he's had a hard day. He comes through the door, and there's the mother saying, little Johnny, take care of him for me. And that's a trap I would recommend that dads not fall into. Now, there's balance because we need to be able to back up um, the mothers of our children. But it can start to fall into that to where now it's wait till your father gets home. And I want to caution all the mothers out there, do not put that on the father of your children because that is unfair. Um, there's a balance, but do not put him in the position to where you can then offload that because it can end up changing things in a negative way. Any thoughts about that?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think naturally, I think that would impact your kids kind of uh, what they look forward to or what they don't when dad comes home in general. If they know dad is going to be the one doing most of the um, I don't know what the term would be, the punishing or um, if they've done something wrong, like, that also I think is a bit stressful on the kids when they're having to wait the whole day till dad gets home
Sorry.
if they know that, like, let's say in the morning they did something wrong, or and so I think that would be a lot healthier, just in general, because when there's a problem, just deal with it straight away when possible, right? There's a motorcycle there.
Uh,
uh,
and
yeah.
since we homeschooled, I would caution people that usually it's going to be the wife, the mom, partner that wants to do homeschooling, if they're going to do that, because you're running a school. Um, I would say not everybody's cut out for that. And just speaking personally, in our situation, even though your mother had wanted to, now in retrospect, I don't think it was probably the right decision for us, simply because she she couldn't separate that out as much as I think would have been better. So I think there was an extra level of stress, so that at times can change the family dynamics. So if
Hmm.
I guess word of the wise out there, if you're considering homeschooling, then it's like running a home-based business. Be very careful to see if if you're able to compartmentalize so that the one doesn't bleed over into the next.
Hmm. I think I'll just comment on that. I think because I've even considered like whether we want to do homeschooling or not, and I think of course a lot of parents, especially nowadays, we were talking about the schools and that. But I think it definitely has its pros and cons, the homeschooling. So I think it can be good if you do it, if you take a deliberate approach to it and you make sure your kids, get enough socialization in that. But yeah, as you mentioned, it definitely has its, whether you would call them downsides or what makes it more difficult, because of course you're home all day or a lot of the day, so it's um, I suppose talking it over and making that decision with as a couple, I think is the way to go.
There we go. And that would be true if you're going to do your own business. I know Laura kind of has her own business, and as you said, she has part-time business baking. As you told me, she during those times that she's doing that, she may be up all night, and so that obviously Dad has to step in at that point. So where did that go? Um,
Mm.
okay, thrifty. Speaking of that, so we'll just transition here. We just talked about, supplemental income, but thinking about the responsibility to make choices, avoiding waste, demonstrating good stewardship. So we have talked a little bit about this, but any additional thoughts on the idea of being thrifty or anything coming out of our own experience that you remember?
Yeah, I mean, of course, finances is such a big part of life. It's one of the main parts, because it affects pretty much everything we do, or can afford to do. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'd say, there are definitely a lot of things you can do um, with your family that are thrifty, and I think a lot of it has to do with your attitude as well, and just making things fun, even if they're simple. Because like, let's say you mentioned, a lot of dad before we were talking before we started, and you mentioned a lot of dads just think of Disneyland or Disney World, right? That's, oh, we need to go on these big trips, and I mean that could, even a fun trip like that, it could just end up being really stressful, or so I think it's a lot about how you make it fun, whatever it is that you do, and if you're trying to have experiences with the family, and um Yeah, what comes to your mind as well when you see that?
Well, what you just referenced, yeah, including at Christmas time and holidays, that can be such a challenge, especially if you're on a budget, because we want to make time special. And oftentimes, usually that means money. So, can we think in ways and creatively to where we don't have to fear when the credit card statement comes in? Think about what happens at Christmas time. So, parents, out of guilt or desire, either one, usually end up blowing their budget. That's again why a lot of people don't do a budget. And then all of a sudden, what happens in January? Now you've got a lot of fighting going on between the partners or the spouses because now money is tight. And so it went from a high at home, and that can affect the atmosphere and the mood of the home. And that can start sort of a crazy making cycle where we have good times and all of a sudden tension because now we're paying for the good times. And then we feel guilty. And in order to make up for it, we're going to try to do something special. And then you could see how that can start to create its own cycle of where the kids start to feel like the good times are few and far between, and you got to enjoy it while it lasts because it's only a matter of time till the other shoe drops, and then we have regrets, or the
Hmm.
fun, the nice atmosphere gets taken away or evaporates because now the parents are fighting, maybe over finances again.
Yeah, well, it's well said. And I think a lot of it, I don't have too much I can speak to on this just yet because, of course, just the age of my child. So I think, when you have a toddler, you're mostly just going to parks and that. So I think um, that's kind of why I directed that to you, is because you went through the whole experience of all the phases and the sports and that.
Well, and
Um,
we'll actually this will be our teaser because maybe we'll do part two. We'll split this up into two parts. I'll show a couple of little snippets here in just a moment as a teaser of what people can expect as we will review some video, home video. Um, a big part of that will be what can dads do that are operating on a shoestring budget, so to speak? Can you have good times with your kids without blowing the budget? So I think we'll be able to be helpful with that here coming up. Brave. Now, what does that mean? Good question. Does it mean that I have to take on the enemy and absorb the air? Literally, well, I do think, um, yeah, we need to be brave. But I think there's a lot of different ways. So, dad faces challenges with courage and determination, persevering through difficulties. I'll tell you why I'm laughing, because I think one time I heard about this concept, and the speaker said, and dad, this can even apply to this. Who's going to smash the spider on the wall? There's something going on in the home, and even taking out the trash sometimes might seem like, uh, if somebody doesn't want to face an issue, is dad willing to step up? Now, that may not be totally in the brave category, but let's say there's a difficult conversation that somebody needs to have with somebody in the family. Is dad willing to step up and have that conversation? Thinking about in-laws. Um, Even it could be an act of bravery with one spouse or partner saying, you know what, I think we do need to set up a budget. I think we need to talk about these issues. So there's a lot of different ways, I think, in thinking about how does courage manifest itself. Okay, me having said that, what any thoughts come to mind?
yeah, actually, that what you just mentioned about relationships and more or maybe you could call it emotional bravery or something along those lines. Where, so an example with Laura and I, we will have situations where kind of the type of fights that we normally will have, of course, without going into too much detail, but I think every couple, of course, has their style of arguments. Um, we'll usually it'll be I'll do something to annoy her, and then her response might annoy me, and then we'll kind of just shut down and won't talk to each other for it's sometimes it's gone for 1 or 2 weeks where it's kind of waiting for whomever the first person is that will kind of apologize or bring it up.
Mhm.
So I think that's again, it's not exactly bravery, but it's um, being willing to kind of take that ego hit, you could say. Because of course especially when you have kids and as they get a bit older, of course they're going to be watching the parents as an example of how do they resolve fights or arguments. Um, so I think that's a good example, is because of course you'll talk to a lot of coworkers, of course you spend a lot of time with, and other men, and a lot of them, they'll just talk about, oh, being masculine or being a man, or um, doing. There's that, I'd say, faulty concept of, oh, you run the house and you're the man, that sort of thing, and that's more that, of course, the term that goes around the toxic masculinity, which I think is a lot of times true. So
Very
the thing is that,
heavy-handed, but a heavy
yeah,
approach to being the husband or partner and the dad. Like I rule the roost, what I say goes, kind of thing.
exactly. And no, I think I still have to learn that balance because I'm almost the opposite sometimes, where I'll get a bit nervous, or I'm not sure how to bring something up. So I'm almost the opposite in that aspect. But I think just knowing when you need to face those situations, and being okay, I need to bring this up because otherwise it's just unhealthy for the relationship. So I think being willing to face those uncomfortable situations in relationships, I think is somewhat in that category of brave. Um, and you mentioned the spider on the wall, for example. Um, I will sometimes Laura will be the one to kill the spider on the wall, but will sort of half and half, I'd say, in our relationship. Like I'll still, you remember, Dad, me as a kid, I would let the insects outside. Like I still do that. Um,
That you're compassionate. You were always
yeah. So I think it doesn't, of course, as in life in general, it doesn't have to be a blanket statement like, okay, the man has to be brave and kill the spider. It's, well, sure, if he wants to let it outside, but he has to be the one to do that. So
okay.
it's, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. For those of you that are extremely empathic, um, I probably, I think I'm very consistent. Even now, when I see a bug in the house, I probably did I go after him pretty intensely.
I don't remember, to be honest. It's,
So, yeah, when it comes to South Carolina has big bugs, so I'll go after those with a vengeance. Um, Something that came to mind is talk about being brave. I think it's very easy for people, so adults, so spouses or partners. This is not uncommon that, let's say, I'm frustrated by somebody in my life, whether, let's say, a family member, um, or even, okay, um, or even like a company, or I purchased something and it didn't go well, so now I need to return it, and there may be the potential of quote unquote um, confrontation. Um, I want to challenge those partners or spouses that are inclined to offload that on your partner, right? Because it would be wonderful to be able to say, well, I can't handle the conversation. You say it or you talk to them for me. And what I would say is, don't do that. That's unfair, right? You learn how to step up and have those conversations, have those difficult conversations so that you don't offload it onto somebody else. Because it's very easy for a spouse or partner to say, I just can't handle it. It just all stresses me out. I'm going to have this conversation. And before you know it, the partner or spouse, the other person has said, well, you know what? I'll talk to him for you. And little by little, that can fall into the norm, where now it's almost like I'm rescuing my spouse or partner. Whenever they get upset, I'll go ahead and I'll smooth things over by making that call or having that discussion when each of us need to be able to have discussions without passing it off to somebody else. Now, there are times, right, that if I know I'm not going to handle it well, but I think each of us need to be able to handle it well and not offload that to our partner or spouse. Any thoughts about that? Not that you need to, but
Yeah, and just for clarification, because if you're talking about in both aspects, right? Both the man and the woman, or the wife and the husband, right? Is neither one offloading it to the other?
yeah.
Makes sense. Um,
I think I fell into that a little bit with, I'm thinking in our situation with your mother, um, because she would say that she would get so worked up that I think I stepped in a few too many times where she could have handled it. Um, but she would get herself worked up or, appear to be overwhelmed. And so then, let's say I'm just making something up, but let's say dealing with cars. Now, I do think us guys need to be able to, both need to be able to, but it's unfair. For instance, now that I think about it, one thing she would do is, I don't know about cars, and you just do it. You just talk to the mechanic, right? And so I may be getting all these calls at work from her, um, and it doesn't mean that somebody doesn't need to know about. I'm just using that as an example, but um, it would be very easy for someone to say, "I just don't handle that kind of thing very well. I'm going to offload that kind of conversation um, to my spouse or partner." Well, how about like with in-laws? How about this? Um, if the spouse or partner says, "Your mother drives me nuts. I think you need to talk to her." Okay, that's very common. Okay, there's a balance, but the question is, if you have an issue with somebody, whether we're related to them or not, um, can I go to them directly? Or am I offloading that, my responsibility to, let's say, speak the truth in love, speak the truth in a reasonable fashion? Love is not nice, it's effective. So do I hide behind somebody? Right. So can I, for instance, if I was single, would I offload my responsibility to go talk to somebody? So I think oftentimes um, it's not uncommon for one or the other spouse or partner to kind of offload some aspect of communication to another spouse, saying, "Well, I just don't do that very well. I don't, so you take it." Yeah, so that I think more common than not in relationships.
that's well said. And I think that something I've thought about a fair bit to do with relationships and handling situations is, and I've mentioned this as well to Laura, is that even though we're in a relationship, and we're still individual people in the end. So, and I think that's something important, especially for couples that have been together for a long time, that whether, especially in terms of communication, um, you, you still have to treat the other person, I would say from experience, still treat them just as a separate person, in the sense of you still can't read the other person's mind, no matter. I I would imagine no matter how long you've been in a relationship. Now you can probably guess what they.
Reed, it just occurred to me this entire time I've had us on. I would imagine our picture is probably small, so we're going to keep
Hmm,
going here. But I figured it might be easier for the audience to see our.
there we go.
Then I'll go back. Okay, so I'm sorry.
Perfect. Yeah, at least that's for members who might be watching the video. because I know I like to listen to just the audio portion myself. But um, yeah, so I think no matter how long you've been with someone in a relationship, now, of course, I'm young, so I can only speak so much to this, but I would imagine that it's still important to just treat your partner as a separate person and explain, I would almost say as a friend, just explain something to them the same way that you would as a friend. Don't expect them to be able to read your mind, and don't say, oh, you should know this already, because of course that's just going to make the other person bitter. Um, and yes, just I think that's good communication technique is in general.
Oh, okay. I just thought I'd show our faces there for a moment. Okay.
Yeah.
We're almost thrifty, cheerful, thrifty, brave. Two more. Clean. Oh, here we go. As sometimes they say in churches, we've gone from preaching to meddling. Okay, now clean. Um, Personal hygiene and contributes to a clean and healthy environment. We could say morally clean, so that's a good one. So that's important. But specifically thinking in terms of the Scout oath, um, how many times, does, and oftentimes it's going to be a guy that this is important. So, dads, teach your boys how to clean up after themselves because oftentimes, as the saying goes, the wives or partners have to say, you know what, your mother doesn't live here anymore. Right? So somehow we can treat our wives as our mothers. And the classic thing is the guy doesn't pick up his underwear. The guy leaves the bathroom a mess. Um, just basic things he won't do. He walks by the trash. You can see that it needs to go out. And he'll take it out once the wife or the spouse or the partner um, asks him to. So can a guy be everything from clean to also be proactive? Do we notice things around the house? Everything from burned out light bulbs to how about vacuuming? How about, because if you are a father, then the mother of your kids probably is tired every now and then. So, do we know how to do laundry? Do we know how to fold laundry? Are we willing to do that? And that's part of modeling as well. But most guys, I would say, I'll just say it, most guys are pigs, right? And so, um, when you leave the bathroom, this is a challenge for any of us guys. When I leave the bathroom, is it presentable? Or have I left it? Look at the sink. After it's easy to allow um, toothpaste to start to grow. If you don't brush thoroughly, there's going to be a little toothpaste can accumulate if you spit in the sink. Do you wipe it up after? If there's how about shaving? As we some of us shave, and I'm kidding, right? But you both you're growing out a beard, but whatever we do, it's very easy for guys to leave stuff. Now, it doesn't just pertain to guys. A lot. I've heard that guys will complain that she leaves hair all over the place, but we're focused on guys right now. So, picking up after ourselves, can we make it? Can we take our clothes and put them in the clothes hamper, or Does our spouse, does our partner, do they have to pick up after us? Um, okay. Any thoughts about that? And then maybe even I'll let you rate how I did as a dad. We'll find out.
Yeah. Um, I would say something that came to mind talking about those specific situations, like the underwear on the floor or hair in the sink. A specific example. So with Laura and I, um, like she just because it's realistic, right? Yeah. None of us are perfect, so there's always those little things, which I think is what oftentimes gets in the way of having that good relationship is you get caught up in those little, oh, this person leaves the toilet paper the wrong way, or they always, those little things. So, for example, um, Laura might like end up leaving her hair after a shower, right? We have the little drain plug where it prevents the hair from going down the shower, and so oftentimes, her hair might end up for a few days even on the side of the tub. Now, of course, I could say, "Oh, that's her hair. She should clean that up." And sure, maybe she should, but I think it's important to kind of be willing to um,
Yeah.
not make too much of it, not make too big of a deal about those things. And so I can think to myself, you know what? Like I might, if it really becomes an issue, if it's really something that bugs you, of course it's good to mention it because you don't want to just, well, it's my duty. But in that example, like sure, I'll clean up her hair, fine. Because I know I do things that I'm sure gross her out, or um, yeah, I'm sure I forget about a lot of things
And
as
that
well.
and that
I'm
fits into being helpful and cheerful. Yeah, right. Can we step in and help when necessary?
yeah, so exactly, and because it's easy to the people that you spend the most time with, I think it's easy to get annoyed with them a lot more or more easily because you see those things every single day. Every day he's doing this or she's doing this. So I think it's um, being willing to, um, there's a word I'm looking for, but kind of just overlook it a little bit in the sense that, okay, I know she's taking care of our daughter. She does a lot of things. She spends hours washing the dishes because we don't have a dishwasher, for example. So I'm like, I can clean up her hair every now and then. So I think that's a good example where, um, and that is just cleanliness in general. Um, and then you were asking like how you did. Now, keep in mind, we were talking about confrontation. I'm not always, I'm still working on getting better with confrontation. So I'm, uh, I always have difficulty saying the negative side of people. So
This
I think,
this will be good. Okay, so go for it.
yeah. Well, not even that something specific comes to mind. I'm just saying, if you're asking like how did I do about something, I would have trouble saying if you did something poorly anyway. But but overall, I'd say you did a good job at cleaning up after yourself. Like I don't remember the washroom being disgusting, and um, I'd say you had good hygiene overall. So that was I'm sure all of us as family we appreciate that because it's yeah, of course you don't want a gross dad. I think even if the dad, I know there are some men out there who for sure think, oh, they're the man of the house, and their family should clean up after them because they work hard in the at work. But no, of course, you're spending so much time with your family, and you should be considerate as a dad as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And so you're thinking something as simple as, well, clean. I guess this has to do with courteous. How many guys belch? Verb.
Hmm.
Okay. And reverence. A good dad shows respect for God and others' beliefs, demonstrating understanding and tolerance. Right? Having a dad. First of all, there's a lot of guys that don't want to or not interested in thinking deeply about things. As the saying goes, there's only two things guaranteed in life: death and taxes. And existential therapy. Viktor Frankl, who wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning, he went through the Holocaust experience. All his family died. He was a psychiatrist and he was interested. He survived. And I think one of the things that was very much of interest to him, having lived through that experience, was what makes for or facilitates resilience in the most extreme of situations. And what he concluded, and which forms the basis of what's called existential therapy. So one of the theories in counseling. So you have behavioral therapy and cognitive behavioral. One is called existential therapy. And so if somebody's an existential therapist, when they're working with somebody, they will inevitably touch on these three key issues because from that perspective, and it's very true, quite frankly, um, that a lot of anxiety then from an existential therapist perspective, if somebody has a lot of anxiety or depression, it might be that they haven't settled for themselves the three key issues in life. And those would be, where did I come from? Why am I here? And where am I going? So, even just from an existential perspective, unless I have a sense of purpose, why am I here? Unless I have a sense of origin, am I just the byproduct of a cosmic accident? And did we climb out of the primordial soup? Is it just evolution? And therefore, there's nothing really special about us. So, am I special? Do I have a purpose? And then where am I going afterward? That doesn't mean that dads have to be theologians. That just happens to be an area of interest of mine. But the question is, um, because every kid ultimately is going to begin to ask those kinds of questions. So, can dad and does dad is he ready for some of those questions? Because what happens if we experience the death of somebody? If you have a pet, it's only a matter of time till the pet dies. So there are going to be those questions. If you have a loved one and the loved one dies. Um, so I do think it's important for dads to think that through. And then also, what about the beliefs and understandings of others? And can a dad think through? Does he understand foundational beliefs? Can he appreciate it, as well as, are there such issues as truth? Is there universal truth or is there not? And so underlying religious beliefs, ideally, is going to be a search for truth. Is there something true that, especially when the storms of life come in, that's when I'm probably going to need something bigger than myself. So, any thoughts about that, Reed? I know I kind of dumped the truck load right there. But
Oh,
thinking
it's
in
good.
terms of the Scout law, this was the last one that they used to reference.
Hmm. Well, I think it does bring to mind a lot of situations that, especially young dads, they will inevitably face with their kids as their kids are growing up. And I think it's good for dads just to think of, including myself, of course, um, how they will respond to those situations and just to be ready for, again, that's a good example about the pets dying because um, I think you don't, you certainly don't need to have all the answers. And I think it's good to show, what's the term where you show you don't know everything and, you're not perfect because, um, of course, your kids will eventually see, oh, well, you're human too, right? But
Right, they'll figure it out.
yeah, um, well, yeah, I think it's good, especially teaching your kids as well critical thinking. I think that's my goal, or one of a few goals that I have as a dad. I think is, um, instead of actually almost rather than giving my kids the answers and the answers that I see as the answer, more teaching them or teaching my daughter just to think for herself. Because yeah, especially those bigger ideas and those concepts that we are talking about, spirituality and religion, and that um, we all as individuals end up deciding what we believe, and that regardless, and that's regardless of what our family believes. So I think, I guess, thinking beforehand about those situations and how you're going to respond to them as well, those topics.
And that fits really well into kind of, it makes for the perfect bridge or transition. I am aware that you've been great with your time right now, Reed, and you're a busy dad. So what we'll do is we'll actually bring this to a conclusion. We'll figure out how soon we can pick up part two, which will then be their very practical stuff. But thinking in terms of the idea that values are more caught than they are taught. And so, especially when it has to do with faith and or religion, whatever term anybody wants to use, religion tends to be more structure, um, and usually has to do with corporate type of experience, so going to a church or mosque or synagogue or whatever. But it's very easy to have that just become rote or ritualistic. That's a challenge for each generation, for each parent, well, each generation. So the parents that we're talking to, the question is, what is real for you? And then can you pass that along? But each generation needs to make that their own, right? We can't force feed our kids, so to speak. You can't force anybody to believe anything. And so if you're able to, as a dad, I remember that we saw the video series, The Truth Project, and that was, I think, extremely well done. So it covered the ideas of how do we know what we know? And I really liked it. I don't know if you remember much about that, but it was set in a classroom setting, in an Ivy League, recorded probably in an actual Ivy League classroom. And it was presented in sort of seminar style. And it just went through just the various parts, part one through, there may be like 8 or 9 different parts. Um, but it's looking at the issues of truth from multiple different angles. How do we know? How do we test reality? How do we know what we believe is actually rooted and grounded in reality, something real? Because it's one thing to have a belief, have a mental assent, intellectual assent. But the time that we need it is when we go through the valley of the shadow of death, whether physical death, but it's usually going to be emotional. I'm going through something very, very difficult, or temptation. Right? Thinking about the scout law, what we just reviewed as far as a good dad. So, do I have a foundation, and are there things that form the basis of my character? Because if left to myself, I probably will end up putting myself first, unless I have a sense of accountability, ultimately. Then it's, if push comes to shove, either significant temptation or significant stress, I'm going to lean on my own understanding. Now I'm thinking of Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5 and 6, right? Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Don't lean on your own understanding. Well, if I don't have a belief in God, if I don't have that relationship, then just got me. And so don't lean on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge Him, and He'll direct your path. So the question is, who's directing our path and what path? And so that's important for each person to think through, because it's only a matter of time till difficulty hits. And, Jesus used the parable of, when the storms are sweeping against the house, they're beating against the house. What's my house founded upon? Either sand, I've either built upon sand or built upon a rock. So that's important for each person to think through, because if you go through a Job kind of experience, you're going to begin to ask very significant questions, and a lot of those are existential questions. So, Reed, I think it's been a good list, right? Each of us as dads now can know what it's like to, what is a good dad? What's an Eagle Scout dad look like? And so we've covered those. Let me provide a little teaser for part 2, and then behind the scenes, we'll figure out when we're going to record that. Sooner rather than later, but whenever it works. It may even be today, but we'll find out because you're a busy dad. Um, but being able to think in terms of, okay, how can a dad be a good dad, especially when time constraints and financial constraints, as well as then what we'll be talking about. One of the things I suggested is each of us talk about, what did we get from our own upbringing that tended to be positive? What did we take away? For instance, with my dad, he was not engaged really whatsoever in my life. He never came to one of my school events, never came to one of my sporting events. He just was never there. I thought we went skiing until I started thinking about it. And how many runs did my dad ever take with me? 0. Well, we had a good time skiing. That's when I began to realize, wait a second. I had an opportunity. He arranged it that I went on a boarding school. I figured that out the junior year. So I was sent to a boarding school on some sailing schooners. Well, that sounds wonderful. It was kind of a shakedown cruise, but kind of different. How many times did my dad write to me over the course of a year? Zero. So realizing I didn't have much of a model as far as what he poured into me, um, that's a negative. But were there any positive things that I derived from being his son and seeing him in the home? And the first thing, and I know I mentioned kind of coming up with an example, is I never saw my dad depressed. Now, part of that was because he was all about himself in a way. Um, and so it's easy to be optimistic when you're about yourself, but he was very much an entrepreneur. And so the things he did, he really enjoyed. But I didn't even know that it was possible or that it was even a thing to call out sick or to be depressed and pull the covers over your head. And that's something that a lot of people battle with, that when they get frustrated or sad, that they give themselves the option. And now I'm a counselor by trade, so I need to be careful how I phrase this because depression is a very real thing. That's very different also than grieving, but I work with a lot of abuse survivors, so they go through very, very difficult things. Um, but it makes a big difference as to whether or not you saw your parent become so incapacitated that they didn't get out of bed. And that affects you. And so then that becomes an option, that becomes normal. But because I never saw that, I didn't know, for instance, that it's somewhat normal to call out sick and work and go do something else or having a bad day. So I benefited from that, from my dad's example of being optimistic and always showing up. So that's one thing. And I didn't even know that that was sort of, I was absorbing that. So that's a positive character quality that I think those of us who are dads, that we can take in mind that that's very much a value that is caught. So we'll be talking a little bit about that on part two, sharing to whatever extent you have anything. I have a little list. But I want to then give a little teaser for what we're going to watch as a part of that. Let me get back to, there we go. Oh, well, sorry about that. Hold on. Let me, okay, I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint and here is, oh, by the way, I'll do a little promo. I had put together last year a series of tweets, and hopefully it's beneficial. Here's the
Mhm.
link on churchprotect.org that you can go to. As a matter of fact, let me see if I can go to it right here. No, it's I didn't do the hyperlink properly, but there's this under Insights One tab. Now I'll show it when we get back together again here. But I did a series of these. This was us. Reed, do you remember this particular game?
Well, of course. Yeah. I mean, it says it on there as well, but of course, the Axis and
Yeah, okay,
Allies
there you go. They're
is still one of my favorite board games to this day.
there we go. And so I thought, well, that's again one of the examples that it doesn't take a lot of money to spend time with the kids. And so we played Axis and Allies and Risk. So these are fun games that dads and daughters, it doesn't have to be gender specific. And so the little tip I said was tip for dads on Father's Day. Dads, we tend to think of spending time with our kids means ways that cost a lot of money, or in ways that include electronics, which doesn't afford much one-to-one interaction. Playing a strategy board game like Axis and Allies, or This is Risk, can be days worth of fun because we would end up playing for days. We'd have the board out. So, okay, I'm going to just play one. You don't know what I have queued up. And so we have a number of videos. We'll just watch a little snippet here and I'll get your feedback. But here's different ways that dads can be involved.
So now he has this crazy idea that he's going to get the kids out there playing soccer all the time.
Getting the kids out of the home. That's cool.
Okay, Let go. Okay.
It's freezing out here. The killer and consummate hard worker.
Yep.
He always digs out our poor little van up there,
Yep.
stuck in the snow. He and his shovel.
Now we could conceivably make a little tunnel here, but not quite deep enough.
Lane won't share the sled.
Oh, you want to get that on film?
Well, I want to show you.
That'll be a good reminder.
We want to run and jump. No, look what you're running.
Read any thoughts thus far? You didn't know what I had queued up.
No. Well, it was a huge driveway. I remember that was a lot of work to snow shovel.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, it doesn't cost anything to play soccer with your kids, really. And
Mhm.
what I would do now, if somebody lives in a small house, you don't have to worry about snow shoveling like this per se. But what I figured I would do, and so it'll show the little ramp. Now, again, we had a good sized yard. It was on an angle, so it made for the perfect opportunity to move the snow and create. I figured, you know what? Why not create a snow or a sled run? And so we'll see that in a moment. So that's one way I figured we'd have fun. And we made some snow forts. We also have a cement fort. You did a video for me previously where you talk about, you can see it over in the right-hand corner. Those are cinder blocks because our patio was actually the floor, cement floor of a garage. So we lived in an older place. The previous occupant had torn down their garage. That's where all the cinder blocks came from, by the way. And so I then reconfigured this massive dump pile of cinder blocks. I made a fort for you guys from it. So we have the patio, then down below, as you can see over on the right-hand side. But because we had a slope, it was kind of fun to be able to then take the snow, since I'm having to snow shovel anyways, and make a little track for you guys.
All right, there's Johnny Digger.
Here we are. We're going to make our tunnel,
He's made snow sculptures.
making sure the tunnel doesn't fall again.
There's Lane. How you doing, Lane?
What?
How you doing?
What? I'm not ready yet. Hold on to the button.
Okay.
You can
Okay, show me
tell you to push it.
show me your stuff, okay?
I still remember that sled.
Take a picture first of me. Ready?
Okay.
Come on, go.
Okay, Elaine the man. Here we go. He's up. He dives. Oh!
Okay, well, that'll be a preview. Different things that good dads do. This is showing up. Okay, so those were two activities that didn't cost anything. So dads on a budget can do, again, everybody's situation is different, but trying to think in terms of creativity. How can you do things? How can you spend time with your kids? That just because you don't have any money doesn't mean you can't be involved. So those are just two practical things that we did, and made some forts. We'll show some of those, the snow forts. We had some pretty good snowball fights.
Oh yeah. Yeah, winter was my favorite season because of snowballs.
There's one of the, and I'll bring it up next time on churchprotect.org, some of those little tips for Father's Day. It shows us, and I'll bring that up next time. It shows you and Lane in one of the snow forts, and say, when you have snowball fights with your kids, make war sounds, make explosions, do frontal assaults, and let them win, kind of thing, but not all the time. So, but you were good. You were good at throw ball or snowball throwing and that kind of stuff.
I had a lot of fun with that. And I was thinking, just as in two of those little sections that we talked about, I think it's important to as we're talking about dads, it's important to make sure that we include. Now, I just have a daughter, but that we include the daughters as well as our sons, because of course it's easy for, especially a lot of cultures, it's a very cultural thing where the dads will focus on, oh, the son, but I think it's very important because, um, yeah, like I know my fiance has mentioned herself, like when she was growing up, sometimes there will be certain things where she could tell maybe um, she didn't receive the attention that she would have desired, or the kind of that attention from her parents because she was a daughter, simply because of that. So I think that's important to mention as well, as make sure. Now, of course, something like just playing war games and that. Of course, I think a lot of the boys tend to be more interested in that, but just I think given that whatever it is, just trying to include the girls as well.
Excellent point. Right. And it's easy. And that's where each of us need to be circumspect and be able to kind of reflect. How are we doing? And listen to our kids' mothers because they are able to give us feedback. For those of us that our first child was a girl, I have a soft spot for, I have to admit, you guys, you probably detected that. In this sense, I have a soft spot for all you guys. Um, I didn't think coming out of a family of all boys that I would take to be a dad of a daughter. But for me, it was a lot of fun. Um,
Mm.
so then it's making sure I'm not doing favoritism, right? It's like, well, Dad, how come you're harder on us than you are on her? So it's everybody has these challenges to figure out, okay, am I treating all the kids fairly? So it's not going to be identical, but is there equity? So you play to the kid's strengths, and not every kid is based upon personality. But you bring up an excellent point, buddy. That am I treating boys and girls equally? Am I? And then the more kids that come along, trying to find time for each child. And then what happens if there's crisis? That's a big challenge in families. Oh, let's say you have a medically needy child, or you go through grief and loss. How can I be there for my child while still going through my own process? And Reed, you've been through some unique grief and loss. You lost your mother at an early age that I didn't have to relate to or I didn't experience. So that's something that I'm part two, if you want to talk about it, as far as what has that grief and loss process been like? We don't have to go into any details other than that makes it challenging, especially even on Mother's Day. For those that I know, we're talking to a lot of guys that have experienced the loss of their mothers. And whenever any of us lose our mothers, my mother is actually still alive. There are a lot of guys that have lost their mothers early at age 2 and age 3 or never even knew their mothers. So there's a lot of different situations that guys are experiencing. A lot of guys lost their dads or somebody left the family or the breakup of a relationship early on. So they were raised by a single parent. So there's a lot of issues of loss, which can make it challenging then to be fully emotionally present in the moment because unresolved loss can cause me to be distracted or keep me from connecting. So a lot of that is important. So, Reed, you've been great.
Thank you.
We've just so I want to be mindful. We'll talk off air, so to speak. We'll figure out when we're going to do part two. And then that'll be the practical stuff that we can suggest to guys. Both what did we get from our own dads? Um, the takeaway that we may not have even realized that we benefited from. And then we'll look at more video clips. So everybody will be able to see what I was like as a dad and then what it was like. We'll show some birthdays, show some Christmases, some normal days, and it's the cutest little shot. So an upcoming we'll see what you were like I think you were like 3 or 4 and you were folding clothes. It's the cutest darn little snippet. So it's a lot of fun to go through some of those. So Reed, thank you. Any parting thoughts that you want to share?
No, just looking forward to the next part, and that's been good. Good getting some different perspectives on those the Boy Scout um, uh, attributes, and I think it's good to talk about that, and good for me as well as a dad, because of course we're talking to dads out there, and for myself. So
And to all the dads out there, Reed, you included, on behalf of me, happy Father's Day to you, Reed, and to all the fathers. I know we wish them happy Father's Day. And hopefully this has been encouraging. Again, we don't have to do it perfectly, but the trajectory, if we have something to aim at, and so there were some character qualities, then hopefully the next generation will benefit. So, Reed, thank you, and we'll look forward to picking it up at this point, part two.
absolutely, thank you.
Love you, buddy.
Love you.